Welcome back to the channel. These are the new wheels for my daily driver. Now, this is one of the only things I disliked about this car since I bought it, was the wheels that came on it. So what I finally was able to do was find an OEM set from a similar year, and that I think personally look a lot better on this car. Now, as for this set, these are 19-inch OEM wheels, and I'll do a separate video of how I figured that out. I'll link that in the description below. I actually looked at a few sets of wheels before I found one that were actual OEMs and not knockoffs. Now, with that, I got all four of these wheels with tires and with the TPMS sensors for $460, which I think is an incredible deal considering most were going for $2,000 plus.
Now you might be asking yourself, if a normal set is $2,000 plus and you got these for $460, well then what is wrong with them? So going into the condition in a little more detail here, there's a lot of typical nicks, scratches, and dings. There's a small spot of potential curbing on only one of these wheels. And if you look at the backside, there is a bit of corrosion as well, but this is all very typical wear and tear for a set of New England wheels that are almost 10 years old. And the other issue is the tires. I have 3 of them that match, although one of those 3 that matches is basically a street slick because it has no tread depth remaining, and it has this one random knockoff brand tire that not only doesn't match brand-wise, but also isn't even the same size as the others. Needless to say, that has to be replaced.
So with that, I made another terrible financial choice, and I bought these. These are Michelin Pilot Sport All-Season 4 tires. And this is the 3rd set of tires I have bought in the last 6 months, and there is nothing more that I hate than buying tires.
Basically, the matching tires were $375 per tire, and these new ones that I got, I paid $263 each, which is a little bit more than $100 less per tire, meaning that I was able to buy all 4 of these for $302 more than if I bought only the 2 replacements, which have much worse traction ratings in both the dry and the wet. So I got a tire that's much better rated for both comfort, longevity, and performance for really not a significant amount more, and I got twice as many tires for that dollar value. Now, full disclosure, I actually filmed and did this whole video a couple of years ago, so I ordered these in the middle of COVID, which means I had substantial delays in when these tires came in, and that my winter tires were still on the car despite me filming this in June. That said, my winter tires were about ready to melt on those first few really warm spring days, so today's big plan was take these over to a shop, get these tires mounted on the wheels, do a couple other service items on my car while I was waiting, then finally be able to get these on my car and enjoy it. I would have also really liked to have refinished these wheels before putting them on the car, but this was also in the middle of my yard renovation project, which I'll link below. So ultimately what it came down to is I did not have the time or energy to do it yet, but that I plan to do it in the future. And per usual, I like to weigh these beforehand to pretend that I'm a race car driver, despite the fact that this is a base model Cayenne. And these tires are the Michelin Pilot Sport All-Season 4s. These are a 265/50 ZR19. So here's the weight of each of those 4 individual tires, and then this is the average weight among them. And with that critical science experiment away, we are now ready to load these up into my car and to try to get them over to the tire shop. And the shop I'm using today is the same shop that mounted my Corvette wheels not very long ago. And while I was able to fit those 8 Corvette tires into the car, those are not nearly as tall as these Cayenne tires, so I was a little bit worried about the space here. But just like the Corvette, I found extra room in the front seat, though these tires were actually tall enough that they were scraping the headliner as I pushed them all the way in. That did make me a little bit nervous.
This will be interesting. This is going to be the lowest visibility ride I've taken in quite some time.
I literally have to hold these in place, and I have no rear visibility. But here are the tires mounted in back of my house. They all look good, they all have tread again, and more importantly, they match and they rotate. I also had the shop check the TPMS sensors. Not only do they work, they also have pretty good battery life, and they are compatible with the 2012 Cayenne, which was a concern that I had. So in general, I'm actually making out extremely well on these, which almost never happens to me. And as an added bonus, this is the same shop that I used the Corvette. They actually charged me less money than they initially quoted to do all that work. It was $83 to test the sensors plus mount all 4 of these tires. By comparison, most other shops in the area, if they would do it, would charge closer to $150 for that same work. And that's part of the reason that I wanted a designated set of summer and winter wheels. I don't want to spend $300 a year changing over to tires that I already own. But you can clearly see this is all piled up in my garage, so the next step is going to be getting these onto the car and then prepping the Corvette for my next autocross day.
You sure? Can I start? You're definitely not going in there. All right, today is the day. We're gonna get these on. And more than that, we are also going to finally use some of this stuff on my workbench, like most of these boxes and containers and gloves over here. With that, let's get the car moved. Let's get it up into position on the jack stands and then hopefully clear out my garage.
Alright, so first things first, moving the Cayenne more to the center of the driveway so I can actually get on all four sides of it without sitting in the grass. And the reason that I actually don't like doing this is because if I need to run out to the store and get another part for whatever reason, having the car this far over in the driveway blocks my Corvette in the garage, which means I would have to take the motorcycle out, so let's just hope I'm not picking up any wheels today. But believe it or not, this was actually the first time I ever had to jack up this car and put it on jack stands, despite this being roughly 2 full years into my ownership. And the reason for that is not only to put on the new wheels, but also to do a full brake fluid flush. I'll be using ATE Type 200 brake fluid. This is a full synthetic that's pretty good. I've used this for a lot of track vehicles in the past. And you have to be able to catch and dispose of the old brake fluid, so I've got these brake fluid bottles from Motive that hook directly up to the calipers. And I've also got Motive's Power Bleeder, which basically applies pressure to the top of the braking system, so when you open the valve at the bottom, it automatically pushes the new fluid through the system. Now in theory, you don't need that if you have a friend who's willing to sit there and pump the brakes to help you, but I couldn't find one today because the high was 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Friendly reminder, don't forget to hydrate as much as you can if you're working out in conditions like this, otherwise you will regret it later. But let's get into flushing these brakes. Now I was going to do a full video explaining how to do this on a Cayenne, but quite frankly none of you watch my how-tos, so I'm going to skip that and we're just going to cover this time lapse, starting with setting up this Motive Power Bleeder. Basically the cap here connects to the top of your brake fluid reservoir. You put your new brake fluid in this system, and instead of someone physically pressing on the brakes to build the pressure and to push out the old fluid at the calipers, you're relying on the pressure that you just pumped up to compress this tank to push everything through instead. It's effectively the same thing, except that you're doing it on your own because we all know you have no friends that want to help you. Now, truth be told, most normal people do not really need to do a brake fluid flush very often, and the only reason I need to is because recently I had 2 close calls that caused me to boil the fluid in these lines, which introduced air into the system and made my pedal a lot more spongy and gave me less braking power. Basically, someone ran a red light, I had to lock up my brakes to not run into them, and then somebody on the highway about 2 days later decided they were going to cut over 3 lanes to their exit with no turn signal, and even though I locked up my brakes on the highway, they still missed me by less than a foot. So that said, if you have no problems with your brakes, don't feel like you need to do this, I'm explicitly doing it because I have an issue. But if you haven't bled brakes before, effectively what you're doing is you're going to go to the farthest caliper away, because that is the longest line. You're going to crack that sucker open, and then you're going to drain all of the fluid out of it until all of a sudden the fluid changes color to what the new fluid looks like. At that point, you'll know that you have new fluid through the entirety of that line because that fluid doesn't really mix or compress. And then you're basically going to repeat that for the other 3 corners as well, starting again with the farthest one away and then working your way to the one that's closest to that reservoir that you filled up with brake fluid. But as you're doing this, make sure that you don't run out of brake fluid in the reservoir, because if you get any air in this system, it means you have to restart the entire process. Because if you don't, there's going to be air in that system, the air is going to compress when you go to hit your brakes are going to feel like an absolute sponge, and then your car's not really going to be slowing down as much as it should be. And if you've never experienced that, well, I have, and it is one of the most terrifying experiences you can have in a vehicle. That said, this is not an impossible task. You can totally do this on your own. I think I paid $65 for the Motive Bleeder, and then I probably paid about another $20 to $30 with all the brake fluid. Even so, the shops near me were quoting anywhere from $400 to $600 to do the same fluid flush, and as always on this channel, I fully recommend trying this on your own, because even if you fully screw up, you're only about $70 to $80 in the hole. Whereas on the other side, if you're losing $500 paying somebody to do this when you could do it on your own in 2 to 3 hours, that's effectively the same as you making $125 an hour to do this yourself. And I don't know about you, but personally, I don't make $125 an hour in my day job, so that is absolutely worth my time. The only other big recommendation I have if you haven't bled brakes before is that the fluid is extremely corrosive. Don't get it on your skin, make sure you wear gloves, and I'd recommend eye protection too. But it is also corrosive to the point that it will strip away paint on the car. So if you spill any in your car when you're filling up the reservoir, just wipe it up immediately and try to wash that area. And as you'll see when I'm draining all 4 corners of this car, I'll try to put down a piece of cardboard below it and I'll have a rag on standby. That way if anything spills up, I can clean it quickly. I don't want to be picking this up with my tires and either having it corrode the rubber slightly or flinging it up onto the side of my paint. Either of those are really not a great scenario. scenario. But anyhow, I eventually finished all 4 corners of this. You can see this nice disgusting old fluid is substantially darker than the new fluid we're putting in. And at this point, we are just about ready to put on the new tires. But of course, before we can do that, we have to weigh these because I am a man of science. So these are obviously the weights of the wheels with the tires mounted and any wheel weights to balance them out. These are the weights of each of those 4 wheels as I measured them. So taking the average weight of one of these tires from our measurements before, that means these are what the wheels themselves weigh. And as for what that means, I have genuinely no idea because I have never before weighed the wheels of an SUV, but to be honest, I don't think shaving a few pounds from the wheels would really matter anyway, considering that the curb weight of this car is almost 5,000 pounds. Or to put it in terms you might be more familiar with, the weight of your mom. And with that important piece of scientific discovery out of the way, we are now ready to get these wheels onto the car and then get this car back onto the ground. As I said, these old wheels were one of the only things on this vehicle that I was not wild about, and these new wheels completely transformed the look. Because before it looked like I was a soccer mom, and now it looks like I'm a middle-aged divorced dad going through a midlife crisis. Kidding, of course, no one's ever loved me enough to marry me, but anyways, these things do look a lot better, so let's take a closer look. Okay, jokes aside, I gotta say, these things look absolutely phenomenal, and they cleaned up so well despite the fact they do have a bunch of minor paint chips in them. I am genuinely impressed by how much these wheels make the car look better because I was not expecting this much of a transformation, and it genuinely makes me love this car that much more. But at this point, it was more than 95 degrees Fahrenheit outside. I was roasting to death, covered in sweat and grease and grime, and I obviously didn't want to messy up my entire interior going to test drive it now, so I went inside to rehydrate and shower. Because the next thing we're going to do is try to take this thing for a test drive. Now, before doing anything else, I was just going to pump the brakes and make sure that we had braking pressure since we did do a full system bleed.
Not confidence inspiring.
And if for whatever reason we didn't have full brake pressure, that means I did something wrong and I would have to do that whole process over again.
That's soft.
But the other part of that, being that these are new wheels and tires, I would have to make sure they weren't bent or didn't have any crazy vibrations that the shop missed, because if so, that could be a whole different set of problems that I was not quite prepared for. Which is why I decided it was probably best to do a low-speed trip around my neighborhood before taking this on the highway to work in another day.
I don't like this. Nope, we're not doing it. We're not doing it. I value life. Nice try, universe. You don't get me this time.
Just like I feared, the pedal did not have a lot of pressure. It went pretty much like 2/3 of the way down before pressure really built up. The pressure was really good once it got to that point, but getting it to that point, there's just a lot more pedal travel than there should be and that there was even before I did the flush, which tells me there's air in the system. If it just went down all the way and it never got pressure and I just kept pumping it, that would tell me that a line was open, and I would also see a puddle of fluid somewhere because every time I press it down, I'm just pumping it out of that hole in the line or the open valve or whatever it is. But because it is eventually gaining pressure, we know that there is just a bubble in the line, which is exactly what we didn't want. So that means I let the reservoir run too low. I don't know which corner, so I've got to determine which corner and then go back and rebleed that side. Not what I wanted to do, especially after literally roasting in the sun on a 95-degree day, is find out that I have to go back out and do it again on another day. So that's gonna suck.
It is now day 2. The only thing I did today was the exact same thing that I did yesterday, except I let the car sit overnight and then it rained and it's extremely humid and I am in full-blown afro mode. But it feels like we have some brake pressure. I got a warning light because the tire pressure monitors are new for these wheels because it's a different set of wheels, so it is learning them. But in theory, the brakes feel like they're working. Okay, we're just gonna go around the block and we're gonna start by going uphill because it's easier to stop when you're going uphill than it is when you're going downhill. I got some pressure, okay. My pressures are comically low, like 9 and 10 PSI in the back low. I can literally feel the rolling drag of how low the tire pressure is in the rear. But the brakes work. Not as sharp as I would have liked, but they function nonetheless. All right, time to check tire pressures. But brakes are a success, so that's good. Whew, one problem at a time. They're both good, which means my sensors probably clogged or dead.
Which is frustrating because I did have them check that, and all they checked was that it was sending a signal, and apparently they didn't check that the signal was correct. Which kind of screws me because now you have to unmount the tire, replace the sensor, and then remount the tire, which is what I was trying to avoid by having them checked
before mounting new tires. That sucks.
So maybe I didn't make out like an absolute bandit on these wheels and they weren't the deal of a lifetime, but at least I have brakes that work now, so I'll take the wins where I can get them. Thank you for watching.